Greetings and salutations, folks, and welcome to another conversation on movies. My name is Nick Vracar, and I'm joined today by Alister Rivas.
How are you guys doing?
I hope you are all doing as fantastic as you look, and you all look beautiful today. Today's feature film is Come As You Are, the 2019 release. But considering this is our second episode, I feel that it's important to kind of introduce ourselves, or at the very least kind of expand on who we are, what we look for in movies. Maybe absently, maybe purposefully, what kind of stands out to us. Alister, please take it away. What would you say is something that you generally look for when you're watching a film?
Sure thing. Well, I'd like to say that when I'm watching movies, because I come from more of a filmmaking background. I went to Columbia College, Chicago, finished up there in 2015, started working as a freelance videographer, independent filmmaker, and then worked at 1104, the rental company. And so my approach to film is kind of more technical than I think your usual moviegoer. I'm looking for lighting setups, cinematography, camera gear. Typically I like to find out what the production of a movie, what went into the production of a movie, stunts, organization, what kind of industry insider news I can find, if they had a hard time producing it, if there was some studio trouble. Things like that are the things that interest me about a movie. And sometimes the movie itself might not be great, but the story of how that movie came to be might be great, or a shot came to be might be great. Perfect example would be that one shot in Old Boy, where it's just a tracking shot down that hallway, and it's referenced all the time in film schools, and a bunch of it's like one of those basic things that you need to know.
Yep, that hallway fight scene has become quite notorious.
Especially you have stuntmen, then you have cinematographers, cameramen, directors on how to tell a story, and it all becomes part of the visual language. And they become cues. They're interesting things on, what to look for in a movie, other than just like, oh, was that entertaining? So that's kind of my approach to movies. But Nick, I think you have a different kind of perspective than me. What about you? How do you look at a movie?
Before we get into that, I just want to ask you a couple questions in regards to your own take on film. So you like to focus more on, your focus is on the technical aspects of the thing, but it can also kind of go into the development of the movie. Do you feel this allows you to appreciate a film not just for what is its finished product, but also for its development? Like, even if its finished product might be just fine. Like, let's say The Hobbit.
Oh man, The Hobbit.
The Hobbit is a film that tries a lot of different technical aspects, such as its usage of 48 frames per second in order to better facilitate a 3D experience.
That glorious 48. Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, that nobody else picked up on.
I mean, there's stuff like that because you have obviously Peter Jackson, known for the epic and incredibly masterful Lord of the Rings movie that brought the stories to life. And then you have The Hobbit.
Do you feel this enables you to just appreciate these films a little bit more than perhaps like your average moviegoer? Because you might look at that hallway fight scene in Inception.
Oh yeah.
And like just anybody might see that fight in Inception and say, "Wow, that was it's really cool how they managed to do it." But like you'll go the step beyond and you'll say, "But how did they do it?"
Not that it
And
hasn't
then
been done before,
not yeah, like clearly with great money they have great production.
Yeah, Nolan clearly tapped into Kubrick, and obviously the greatest movies, have some reference to Kubrick or some sort of lineage to call back to him. But it's not that it hadn't been done before. We just hadn't seen it in forever. And especially in order to push the story forward, it wasn't used as just a frivolous gimmick. It was pushing the story forward. And so I think sometimes it's the magician appreciating the trick. Yeah, you might know how it's done, but damn, was it a hard trick to pull off? And for the average movie-going audience member, I think not knowing how that something like that is done is, I mean, it really adds to that suspension of disbelief, and there really is a magic trick happening in front of you. You don't know how it's done, and that's part of the experience of going to the movies or seeing a new movie or seeing a Christopher Nolan movie. It's like, wow, I didn't know someone could do that, or how did they do that? And the spectacle, can be appreciated from that angle, but then also from sheer just like, oh man, he did something that had been done before, put it in a new package, and most of us didn't even realize it. That's great filmmaking.
Now, do you feel that there was this long era? I would say that this era started with Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire, and it carried on well for a good, like, all the way through, like, the end of the Transformers movies, or should I say, like, the demise of people's interest in the Transformer movies.
Please tell me you're going to say screaming into the camera while running away.
I'm more talking about the development of CG, and I'm thinking about, like, that hallway fight scene in Inception, and one of the things that makes it special is it's not done with computers or digital effects. They have a physical hallway to fight it.
Absolutely.
Like, do you feel that, like, the technical side of things, like, is your own interest increased by the presence of these real things, or is it still maintained by, like, how do people manage to combine real and digital while still making it look believable?
Well, my stance on it is I think it's always best. Usually you get the best result from a mix of both, a mixed medium. I think I saw the first, for me, the first great use of this was in the movie Moon with Sam Rockwell.
Excellent film.
The prop department,
directed by Duncan Jones.
Duncan Jones, yes, thank you. The prop department made these miniatures of the lunar rover and the base and stuff, and they filmed those. And miniatures have a long-standing history in cinema, so they've been very well developed. But then the VFX team went over most, if not all of it, with digital, with CGI, and it just gave it, more realistic lighting, a little bit more texture. But you had all the perspective, and the scale was there, and the material was there. You had basically the miniatures acted as incredibly great reference for the VFX.
They didn't
CGI
create these things out of nothing.
Right. So they're grounded in some reality. And I think that's always going to give you kind of the best result. That's not to say that CGI or VFX can't be amazing on their own. But also practical. People worked really hard and for a long time on practical effects for the first 100 years of filmmaking. I think my favorite movie to point to is John Carpenter's The Thing. Some of those effects
that
get
is an amazing
incredibly
work of,
crazy.
Effect, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if
Point,
you haven't seen John Carpenter's The Thing, I mean, it's got kind of a slow first act, but after that, you are going, man.
it's a little disappointing that its sequel decided it wanted, or should I say the production of its sequel decided they wanted to have only digital effects.
Yeah, I think they were going for before it was in homage in a sense to say that before we were in the practical world. Now I think they were trying to make like a landmark production of we've transitioned to full CGI, so now we can do it all in CGI. The CGI is
Oh,
the
oh no,
puppets
it wasn't
now.
like that at all.
Oh,
It wasn't like that at all. Originally, they had practical effects in the sequel, and there are videos I could send you that show the practical effects in the sequel. But the producers were like, "No, CG is what's popular now."
studio heads. Studio heads. I blame studio
Yep.
heads. But all that said, the story behind the story is always very interesting. Like I said, how an actor taps into a role, how a production gets made. I love how Adam Savage gets super into his props and even says that the makeup of his props and the weathering tell their own story. But that being said, all of that is always in service to the story, and that becomes the foundation of the movie. Like, you can't have sweeping shots if the story doesn't call for it. You can't have crazy set pieces if the story doesn't call for it.
Well,
And
you see, Michael Bay would disagree with that. You can have sweeping shots whenever you want.
Damn, you are right.
But
That is an epic bagel that Michael Bay shot. Like, he'll make a morning bagel look good.
But as you're saying, you have so much of an interest in the story behind the story. I know my own interest in film leans towards the story itself, the narrative, the plot that drives the film. And my own interest is largely based around my own interest towards becoming a writer myself. I do not have the working experience, I suppose. Although, what does an unpublished writer consider working experience other than writing and not being published? I did go for a master's in creative writing fiction, completed that. That's generally where my focus tends to lie.
I did
Largely
not realize
because,
you were a master of writing. Kudos.
I'm no longer the student. I have become the master.
Ha ha ha.
But like, you can consider one of the reasons why I tend to lean this way, especially when watching movies, TV show, whatever, is you could have the greatest actors, but give them terrible material, and it doesn't matter what's going on. Like, Patrick Stewart isn't going to elevate the material of Emoji Movie above where it is. Halle Berry is not going to take her Academy Award winner for Best Actress and make Catwoman into a decent film. Like, these things at their core, their storyline, their dialogue, their written word, are just so bad that you could replace the actor, but still maintain the low quality. Like, I feel like Halle Berry especially gets a lot of flack when Catwoman came out. Like, they were like, "Oh, she was terrible in that role," but who would have done better?
Patrick Stewart. I think Patrick Stewart would have done better.
Engage
number one. Which I do think he elevated the Emoji Movie. And in fact, I think he elevated Poop.
Who is not the same now that Patrick Stewart has played with that role, so to speak.
But I'm done.
but also kind of consider some of the best performances. How many of those performances would you say are entirely based on the actor in that specific place and time? And how much of that would you say is the material that the actor also used? Like, if you swap them out with another actor, would you still maintain that quality of performance?
I definitely think that when you have a script that knows its motivations, knows its character's motivations, where it's going, and considers the audience, um, it has a higher chance of not only succeeding, but of bringing out great performances from actors.
True, although this is something that I'm presenting that I feel is very difficult to actually analyze. The best you can probably say is like if you examine like shot for shot remakes, which there aren't quite that many of, and for good reason. But there
No.
aren't too many movies that have people playing the same roles.
Well, let's take something like maybe Inglorious Bastards. You could say a lot of people say it was Quentin Tarantino, and I believe Quentin Tarantino says this. A lot of people say it's Quentin Tarantino's masterpiece, maybe in line with Kill Bill, but that movie is well written. Obviously, the dialogue, being a Tarantino, is immaculate. The scenes, the composition, the character conflicts, the way characters interact with each other, the way tension builds. All of that is taken into account when Tarantino writes this, and so maybe the actor doesn't quite know what they're shooting on that day, or in what context. At the end of the day, the product that the audience sees is a coherent, well-structured, well-built, well-motivated story. Whereas if you have something like, I guess, everybody's favorite crappy movie, The Room, you have, I mean, unconnected
Oh,
tissues.
hi, Mark.
Yeah, you have unconnected tissues of story. Not every scene is motivated or even has a real conclusion or resolution, I guess you could say. Right? Like, what do you think about the difference with those two movies? What stands out to you?
Well, although I think you bring an interesting point in regards to comparing those two movies, considering these are both creations of its own single author. Inglorious Bastards is just as much a Tarantino film as The Room is a Tommy Wiseau film.
And I guess by that you mean wholly original.
Not necessarily, yeah, wholly original, but also like belonging to that individual author, that original auteur. But like you can kind of see that like Tommy Wiseau focuses more on the raw emotion. Like he wants that raw emotion conveyed on film. Whereas Tarantino is not just looking, like you said, he's looking at every facet of the production. Whereas Tommy Wiseau is simply looking at just the emotion that is being displayed. Although I feel as though your point in regards to Tarantino looking at every facet of the production, even though I tend to lean towards looking at the stories that are being told, even though you might tend to look at the technical side of things, all of these things combined are what is required to create cinema.
Ah, yes, cinema. I agree with you there, because you're right. I think it does take more than just a good story, because if you have a good story and yet bad actors, let's say, or a good story. And actually, something that a lot of people say is sound is 60% of a film. Bad audio could
there's
kill your story.
there's a YouTube video where it shows it takes the last scene of E.T. and removes the John Williams score and adds in like the isolated sound effects, and it's just like that scene is pretty much held together by the music.
Yeah, so it takes a lot to definitely make an impact on your audience. And with that, I'm wondering, so you're a narrative focused, I guess we'll call you a critic, if we will, in the second episode. I guess we're declaring ourselves critics now. So
everybody's a critic.
So what would you consider, I guess my question is, what is your favorite movie, or what is a movie that holds the highest standard of story in your eyes?
So I don't really know if I feel it's almost impossible to come up with like a favorite anything these days, but there is a series of movies that I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about, not just considering like what made the original so good and what made the sequels so bad, was The Matrix. And I feel as though The Matrix as a story is perfect. It does everything it needs to do. There is no wasted moment. Like, back in the day, you can probably critique it for the whoa of Keanu Reeves. But also you could argue that sort of thing is part of the presentation. Part of the presentation of it being an action movie from the early aughts. Was it the early aughts or the late 90s?
It was.
Have I become
think it was
old?
Literally 1999.
That was 1999. Like an action movie from 1999 with Keanu Reeves is going to have Keanu Reeves saying, "Whoa, I know kung fu.
It's what
if
the people
you're
wanted.
me and I'm me, what number am I?" No, that's a different movie. But like The Matrix for me is a fantastic story that builds its themes, that builds its characters. Everything is meaningful.
Yeah, you're right.
But for you, what would you say is something that you feel is an example of a movie that is technically proficient?
Well, for me, Nicholas, the movie that exemplifies the most cinema would be
Cinema.
The cinema would be Paul Thomas Anderson's 2012 film, The Master. That's right. And I've gotten a lot of...
Not Ridley Scott's Master and Commander from the Far Side of the World?
I hear that's a really good movie, though. Haven't seen it. Sorry, guys.
You haven't seen it?
Haven't seen it.
It's actually not bad.
I know, yeah. I kind of want to. Just, missed the window, didn't see it. But no. Paul Thomas Anderson's...
It sailed right by?
Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master is my all-time favorite movie. With Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman, you have a younger Rami Malek and that one guy whose name I can't remember that looks like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yes, that's actually his name.
Mm-hmm.
He had to have it legally changed to the one guy who looks like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
And for me, the thing about this movie... Oh, and of course, how can I forget the beautiful Amy Adams? Jesse Plemons is his name, Jesse Plemons. But that movie shot, I think, 60% on 70 millimeter IMAX film, is beautiful. has incredible performances by Joaquin Phoenix, by Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's visceral. I find it incredibly visceral. And it almost has kind of no point, which is what most people's qualm tends to be with it, which is what I find most people have a hard time dealing with, is that it's, I mean,
what was it about?
Yeah, I mean, I see people are praising Coen Brothers movies left and right, but you show them The Master and they're like, "Oh, what was it about?" You know, not that I don't like the Coen Brothers, but it's just one of these things where you meet someone, a character, Freddie Quell, Joaquin Phoenix's character, and he essentially meets his exact opposite, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, whose name right now escapes me. And it's basically a story.
Lancaster Dodd.
Lancaster Dodd, that's right. That's the most ridiculous name ever. But he, to me, it's basically a story of is it the id and the ego? Or the ego and the super id, something like that. I think it's the id and the ego, the carnal nature of Freddie Quell and Lancaster Dodd trying to suppress the animalistic carnal needs of man for a better tomorrow, trying to be more civilized. And basically you see the debauchery of this one character, Joaquin Phoenix's character, in what a lot of society thinks is like kind of the Leave It to Beaver perfect era, the 50s, 60s. But the movie starts off with a whole bunch of sailors. The movie starts off with tumultuous waters. All right, one of my favorite opening shots of all time, and it just shows that nostalgia ain't what it used to be. It's like you think of the times
this old man. She ain't what she used to be.
You think of the times of old, of the 60s and 50s, as like the good old days, but you have this guy coming back from war. He has PTSD. He's an addict. He goes to the party. He's looking for sex. He wants alcohol. And then he finds this, I hesitate to call it a cult, but there are some, what is it, H.P. Lovecraft type. Not H.P. Lovecraft. Who is the Scientologist guy?
Well, before you get into too deep of summarizing the entire movie,
go see The Master. It's amazing.
Go see The Master.
Visceral.
It is
doesn't necessarily have a
I can't guarantee you'll like
ending.
it, but it is a very well made movie, and both
Beautiful.
Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix were excellent.
You were right to stop me, because I could talk about that movie all day.
Especially since we have other subjects to talk about. Such
That's
as
right.
You have an idea on how to save theaters.
Oh my goodness, Nicholas. Have you heard of my idea to save the movie theaters? Because I don't know if you've noticed.
Oh my god, I have heard of your idea, but I don't know any of the specifics. Yep, we'll just dust it off in the bin. Move on to the next topic.
But listen, I got this idea to save the movie theaters. You know how there's this global pandemic going around? Well,
absolutely not, but because I live under a rock.
Well, get off out that rock and don't go to the movie theaters because there's a pandemic. So,
also, I probably can't anyway because they're all closed.
Yeah, most movie theaters are still closed. I think a few are open, but so this is my pitch here.
All right, throw your pitch.
movie theaters should not only be playing the newest releases, but they should dedicate about 4 or so screens to the equivalent of a streaming service. I know, it's crazy. Hear me out. Wouldn't you want to go to a movie theater with a huge screen and an incredible sound system just to watch Schitt's Creek, let's say, and they have, 4 episodes in a row, and then you can just go outside, leave, or you can see a few episodes of The Office at a lunchtime and then go back to work. Would you go to a theater if there was, they have the bar outside, whatever restaurant they have nearby, and then you pop in and you go see an episode of Planet Earth in the big screen, and then you can leave? That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that movie theaters should have a little bit more flexible of a screening schedule, some friendlier content, and possibly some older movies as well. So instead of just showing the newest movies every weekend and trying to make their revenue off that, they have more of a rotating schedule where in 2 screens they show, blocks of television shows on these huge screens and great surround sound. And on 2 other screens they show older movies, movies from a few years ago, classic movies, and on at least one of each of those screens, you'll have a room where you can use your phone, you can take texts, you can, be a little bit more interactive and chatty. On the other screen, you will be in the other theater, you'll be just a little bit more quiet, paying a little bit more attention, a little less disturbed. And then you can have people hanging out, kids hanging out outside, people with money rotating through the door, and you don't have to have a 2-hour wait for the next viewing and all that. I mean, what would you think if you could watch some of your favorite shows on the big screen?
I suppose there is the convenience of watching them at home, though I would agree that theaters have to think about what it means to diversify. Just trying to chase the latest big screen releases is going to be tough, especially considering that Warner Brothers has already announced that they are going to be releasing all of their 2021 films both in theaters and on HBO Max.
Which I think is a smart move considering the times.
It is a very smart move for Warner Brothers. Unfortunately, it's not quite that kind to theaters, but unfortunately, that would be like if there was a sugar-based virus that went everywhere and you owned a candy company. Like, it's not your fault, it's not the people's fault, but unfortunately, you're screwed.
Yeah. But at the same time, the thing is that people just like the comfort of their home. And so you need a reason to bring them away from that comfort. Theaters are very well equipped.
So what can you do to draw people over?
Well, theaters are very well equipped with high-end equipment. I think a good chunk of people have 4K TVs, but not everyone has a 4K TV. I think now is about the time that I think we're going to see a big shift to 4K, but even though that might be happening, also, people don't pay attention to their audio setup, so the audio might
That's
not
what
be
I was going
good.
to say, like, people might have that high-resolution television, as they are known, but they might not have, like, an audio setup. I don't have an audio setup. My audio setup is not fancy at all. So the actual, like, what is a movie that you think is best viewed in theaters?
Well, actually, we did just have on our first podcast, if you didn't check that out, go check that out. We talked about Christopher Nolan's Tenet and how that movie was heavily sound mixed. The the sound mixing, sound effects, and all of those things were incredibly prevalent. Maybe not the best use of sound mixing. That's debatable, and you should check out the first episode to see what me and Nick thought of it. But you're not going to get that experience at home. That was intense.
But it's also kind of an example of like a movie that is made by somebody who's especially catering to theaters. But let's say you consider your horror movies. What would be like a better situation to watch a horror film, or as you were talking about in regards to streaming, like a horror TV show? Is it at home with your lights on, your computer right next to you, your dog, your phone, or is it in the darkness of a theater?
Well, you once again have the cozy factor to compete with. You do have your blanket, you got your bed, your couch, your dog, your loved one that you can cuddle up with. But you don't have that 5.1 Dolby Digital Surround sound with like the 16-foot wide screen that completely immerses you. Theaters have lean back seats, some of them got those nice seats. Some of them even have that rumble. So maybe theaters start allowing you to bring a blanket. Maybe your girl's got a really big purse that she can put a blanket in, bring it for both of you.
AMC and chill.
AMC and chill, baby. See, there you go.
Give you some rumble for your tumble.
Oh, see, you should work in their marketing campaign because I'm already buying my tickets. But I think actually something that people would want to watch recently, I've been watching horror movies or horror just content. Ratchet was a good one, and then I think
I heard good things about that with Sarah Paulson.
Ryan Murphy, obviously a great team trying to move on from American Horror Story, and I think doing a great job. Another one that I think has been catching people's eye is The Haunting of Hill House, which I haven't had a chance to catch yet, but I hear is very good. Have you seen it?
I have seen it. I have seen all of it, and it is very good. I actually just wrapped up watching the first, I guess it's the first season, but like the director, Michael Flanagan, the creator, Michael Flanagan, he's gone on to do Haunting of Bly Manor, I believe. So it's not necessarily a second season as much as it's like a spin-off anthology type thing. But the first season is incredible.
I hear
and you should watch
summary coming on.
Well, you see, it's about ennui. It's about cinema. It's about but I think what I'd like to talk about is not necessarily a summary of the TV show itself. What I would like to talk about is, so Haunting of Hill House is based on a novel by Shirley Jackson. It is not the first time that anybody has tried to adapt said novel. There have been two more that I know of. There's The Haunting from, I think, the 60s. I've not seen that version. There's the other movie, also called The Haunting, from the 90s, which starred Owen Wilson. Liam Neeson was in that one. Did you see that one?
I did see that one. Yeah, The Haunting. And it, I just remember that there was a fireplace scene where it might have been Owen Wilson gets basically decapitated by this huge lion head that comes swooping in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty great.
Yeah. It like swings in on like this. But that's something that is, I feel, something that can be talked about for a very lengthy period of time, the entire idea of what it means to adapt something. But it is because of the nature of like this TV show not necessarily sticking to the original material. Like it features character names, it features the house, but it takes a lot of liberties with the storyline. And in so doing, what it creates is something that resembles more of a Stephen King story than necessarily what it might have originally been. And that is something that I feel is interesting because, so when it comes to movies, there are generally is a wave of films that are like each other. When The Ring came out, there was a huge wave of American movies wanting to bring over that Japanese feel. When Halloween came out, there were slashers. When Paranormal Activity came out, there were found footage films. Even M. Night Shyamalan has a found footage film. But when It came out and made lots of money, it kind of garnered more attention for Stephen King, more specifically, but it hasn't really brought about a wave of Stephen King alikes. And I feel as though I keep saying it wrong. Haunting of Hill House is one of those things that it is something that actually is a like to Stephen King. And I don't want to get too deep into the summary or into the spoilers for that matter.
Right.
But watching Haunting of Hill House, the third episode is what really kind of drove it home for me. That there's these Stephen King-esque characters. There are characters with supernatural abilities that are never quite explained. The house resembles more like the House of the Shining. You have the kids who come back to the house almost like It. You have a character who has to count to a certain amount in order to maintain his grip on reality. You have a character who has a connection to somebody else. You have a character who has the ability to detect things by some sort of like a psychic means via empathy. And I feel as though all of those things are very much in line with Stephen King. And I am going to read to you.
Oh.
I'm going to read to you a quote from Stephen King.
I'm ready.
That he wrote for an article in Entertainment Weekly. He wrote, "Big movies demand big explanations, which are usually tiresome, and big backstories, which are usually cumbersome. If a studio is going to spend 80 or 100 million in the hopes of making 300 or 400 million more, they feel a need to shove what it all means down the audience's throat. Is there a serial killer? Then his mommy didn't love him. Insert flashback. A monster from outer space? Its planet exploded, of course, and the poor, misunderstood thing probably needs a juicy Earth woman to make sexy with. But nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear."
Wow.
And I feel as if there's like a lot of things that aren't like that's what makes Haunting of Hill House so much a Stephen King story. Is it worries less about explaining what is going on, or should I say why things happen, as much as it introduces things and it builds off of the existence of like those empathy psychic abilities and says, well, if this person has this ability, what does that mean for them as a character?
And I feel like after you said it really articulates kind of, he's right in terms of like, yeah, you could explain where this came from or why it happened or this or that, but is that really horror? Or, really horror is like, why is this happening? I have no idea why this is happening to me. Where did it come from? How did it get here? What's it doing? And what, it's the unknown that really
And
scares us.
and earlier today you were talking about The Thing. Like, even by the end of the movie, you still have only a vague idea of what the thing actually is. You've got some means of figuring out who's infected by it, or who's actually this creature living amongst you. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have necessarily that understanding of what it is. Versus, say, like the Alien movies. By the time you get to Alien versus Predator, you know everything you need to know about them.
Yeah. Yep.
There are no mysteries.
Would you consider it an homage or a ripoff of Stephen King?
I would say it's more of an homage. Like, if it was a ripoff, then you would have, like, exact shots.
So would you say there's heart in the story then? Is that why it's an homage?
I would say there's more heart than hijinks within this interpretation of the inspiration of what is a Stephen King story.
So, would you recommend watching it?
Of course. I would recommend it to everyone, except for maybe children, except for maybe young adults,
Had
and the
your kids.
squeamish. Actually, it's not that bloody.
There you go, pretty much everybody. Go watch The Haunting of Hill House, and I'll be checking it out too, because unfortunately I haven't seen it yet, and it sounds pretty interesting.
But you did see another film. You did see, we both watched Come As You Are, released in 2019, directed by Richard Wong, written by Eric Linthorst. It is the story about 3 young men, all of them people with disabilities, who take a journey up north to Canada, where they have heard about a brothel that caters specifically to people with disabilities for the intent of losing their virginity.
That's right, Nick. As human beings, we all have needs. And some people have a harder time meeting those needs than others. So, what I'm trying to say is, everybody's got a virginity, and everybody's trying to lose it.
Everybody? Everybody, though?
I'm pretty sure. Come as you are.
What would you say your more general thoughts on the movie are? Like, as a whole, what did you think of the film?
So, I liked it. I actually thought it was pretty heartwarming. I think the movie thought it was funnier than it actually is, but it wasn't a super huge detriment to the movie. At the end of it, it was enjoyable, it was wholesome, and it was fun. It was heartwarming, I think. What about you, Nick? What do you think about it?
I would agree. From my own viewing, I felt like the first half, the time it takes to introduce its characters, introduce its plot, is very kind of like a mixed bag of hijinks that aren't really there for any given purpose other than to just create obstacles for the characters. Whereas that second half of the story is where it really starts to get into more deeper touches. Like, if you look at like the closest comparison that I would make for this film is American Pie, also another movie about several young men who are trying to lose their virginity. But like the crux of American Pie
comparison, yeah.
Like, the crux of American Pie is their hijinks. The point of American Pie is their hijinks. And then at the end, it kind of gets this neat little resolution where you're like, well, where each character kind of goes about it in a different manner. But the point of American Pie is to see them these guys go about different stupid things in order to try to lose their virginity. Whereas, like, this movie has a very clear-cut case where it wants to move its characters from point A to point B, and those hijinks are unrelated to everything that comes after. And everything that comes after is much heavier than anything that American Pie ever reaches. It's much more emotional. There's much more depth to what it is actually asking about what it means to be human, what it means to be somebody that desires a sexual relationship.
Yeah, in American Pie, it was very much kind of more of a milestone thing, a coming of age story. Whereas in this movie, in Come As You Are, it's more of an empathy journey of a perspective that not a lot of people have, but to know that there are people out there with this struggle of just trying to find almost essentially a basic human connection, because a lot of society has disregarded them, is more touching, is deeper, and kind of more important of a story to tackle than anything American Pie could have done. Obviously, that was a movie for the masses to, make as much money as possible, but to then take that kind of same, I guess I don't want to call it a same structure, but that kind of maybe entry point to then unfold the lives of three differently able and unique people and watch their struggle and how they have to cope with everyday life is very interesting and eye-opening.
Although, like, for me, I almost feel like there could have been more time spent in regards to seeing these characters, who they are, and how they function with their disability. Like, towards the beginning of the movie, you spend a lot of time with Scotty, more or less the main character, who is this paraplegic who can only move his hand and his head.
Yeah,
right?
he's essentially like, if you think of almost Christopher Reeves, he's a quadriplegic.
Okay, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Mo. Yes, you have Mo, who is blind, and then you have Matt, who is bound to a wheelchair, though it's not necessarily explained what or why. There are hints as to like what actually happens to him.
Yeah,
but that's not necessarily important to this discussion at the moment. What's more important is that like where Scotty gets the majority of that story development. Matt gets a little bit less, and Mo gets almost nothing at all.
Yeah,
he's just kind of there. So, like, a lot of the intro to the movie is spent setting up Scotty and Mo as friends, Scotty and Mo's rivalry, or Scotty's rivalry with Matt that is resolved immediately. Matt's girlfriend who shows up and disappears immediately.
One scene.
Like, it just takes one scene for her to go.
We're covering a lot of ground.
Have her in the first place?
Well,
and the thing is, like, I would say none of this ground is spoiler territory, because none of it really matters.
And a lot of it's in the first half, if not the first act of the movie.
It's the less important side of the movie. Whereas, like, it feels as though that first half could have been much more refined, much more better developed. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I'm coming from as, like, somebody who examines films more towards its narrative sense, in that its narrative isn't quite as developed.
And I think you're right.
It gets to where it wants to go.
I definitely felt what you're talking about here, where there, I mean, there was kind of a point, but there were a lot of these hijinks that were kind of there just to be like, wah wah, isn't that funny? Um, but then there
And
were
a lot of
also
them
a
were
good chunk
very
of them.
obvious hijinks.
Yeah, yes, but I also think a lot of the most of them were there to show you the struggle of a handicapped person, someone who is otherly able, and the struggles that they go through. Although, in order to keep the movie lighthearted and fun, they try to make a lot of those jokes. And in
And
making a lot of
that's where
those
you get to the
jokes,
problems.
yeah, they also add almost like filler in terms of like, oh, can't do it because I'm in a wheelchair, or oh, can't do it because I don't have use of my arms. And it's like, it, calling attention to this is what it's like to live in this body as this person in this world that doesn't cater to me, but also some of it is just being like, isn't that funny, quote unquote? I mean, humor tends to be other people's pain, so sure, but I do think the movie does do a really good job of staying lighthearted and not becoming this overly heavy drama that makes people really sad about three disabled people, you know? So in that, I think maybe they were fighting that, and in fighting that, they just went a little overboard just to play it safe. But yes, in the first half of the movie, there, I don't know, it's kind of more of a weaker script, weaker motivations for why some jokes are executed. But all in all, I think it is a heartwarming story that that brings a subject to the forefront that maybe people wouldn't necessarily be thinking about or be comfortable talking about, or might not even know how to approach, is, accessibility for disabled citizens, disabled people. I don't know. Sorry.
I'm not going to hold you to any regard. We cannot expect to discuss things that might be harder for us to talk about if we do not try.
I like
But
that. Yes.
I feel as though the emotional core of the movie relates less to who they are as people with disabilities, and more about what does it mean? What does sex mean? What does love mean? What does a relationship mean to the individual person? And that's kind of where the film eventually goes. It doesn't necessarily start there, because it's kind of like setting you up on the idea that, hey, let's go to this brothel and have sex, and it'll be great.
Actually, Nick, if you want to discuss where it does start, it does start with an adolescent man having morning wood, and his mother, also known as Jean Garofalo, walking in, not batting an eye, picking him up, putting him in the bathtub, and then scrubbing his genitalia, because once again, our main character cannot move his arms. And there is...
But I think that's kind of like what sets up Scotty as a character who, who he is, what he has to deal with day in and day out, better than necessarily Matt or Mo, because you see him on his daily activities. You see him with his caregivers. You see him at home, at the clinic.
Yeah, and he,
that's
for
what
all intents
sets
and
him up.
purposes, has it the roughest. He is the quadriplegic. Matt is the paraplegic. Mo is blind. I don't know if he's fully blind or partially blind, but he's legally blind. So it doesn't really matter. But Scotty has essentially the raw, quote unquote, the rawest deal. He has to deal with, there's a few scenes where he wants to make a toast and the person next to him has to lift his glass for him and he has to signal for that. He has to tell them, lift my glass, I want to make a toast. So once again, it's just the movie putting you in their
but
shoes.
that's also
Yeah.
But that's also, I think, something that works for the movie as well, because you can see the development of the characters as the movie goes on, based on how they interact with each other. You can see how these characters are based on like how they learn to live with each other. And that also makes for that more meaningful second half.
Mm-hmm. The movie has a tough job of really, I mean, I guess it's not crazier than any sci-fi movie you've ever seen, but it does have a job to do in terms of you have to get into their world, understand their struggles, know and sympathize what they're going through before you can get to kind of the more emotional nougaty center, the richer story on the inside.
But and the story does eventually pick up. But what were your thoughts in regards to the more technical aspects of the film?
So a lot of this movie didn't have anything that was crazy technical. They spent most of their time inside, which I guess it's just studios or sets. A good chunk of the movie, they're in a car, which could be green screen or it could just be them on a hitch. And then, yeah, I don't know. There's no exotic locations. There's no crazy camera movements. There's no
Probably the
big
most camera
stunts.
work I think that was done was in Chicago on the bridge. Was their big like they had a very specific shot they wanted to do, and the beach scene, but we don't want to get too deep into that. But like that Chicago bridge scene, they were like, we need to have it at this time of night with the lights out in the background.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's a scene that for some reason they decided to get a Chicago film permit, pay for that thing, get a whole bunch of crew, and put them right in the middle of Whacker. Get on a bridge and just film a scene there. So,
But I believe one of the reasons that we watched the movie, you were telling me something about the making of the film. It was blacklisted and the Chicago
yeah, absolutely.
Media Group, was it?
It's the I have it written down here. Yeah, so Come As You Are is actually produced by a production company called Chicago Media Angels in association with The Blacklist. And if you don't know about The Blacklist, it's a super interesting group that basically takes scripts that circulate Hollywood but don't get made due to, I don't know, studio interest or not being super viable for a large national demographic. And they get on this list called the Blacklist, and then because they're interesting, because people read them, script readers from different studios read them, and they acknowledge that they're well written and interesting stories, but the execs won't necessarily greenlight them. Chicago Media Angels is a Chicago-based production company that helped fund this movie, and that is why they are in the middle of Whacker Drive on like the LaSalle Street Bridge, showing the beautiful cityscape that is Chicago, basically at sunset. And it is one of the more beautiful shots that you see in the film, but it's very out of character. I think Matt, the paraplegic, is actually talking to a character we've never been introduced to in a location we've never seen or referenced. And it's kind of just put there, I think, to, represent.
Gotta represent Chicago.
Gotta represent. And, I love the city as much as anybody, but I think you would agree, Nick, that the shots are supposed to be in service of the story, not in service of the production company.
Correct. Like, if they were actually taking a journey north, would they stop in downtown Chicago with a medical van? Like, where would they even find parking? But I suppose that's
Especially
going
not on
beyond the point.
Whacker.
You could almost argue all cinema is a little bit of a contrivance. Like, and sometimes the entire idea of getting characters from point A to point B, you just have to accept that they found parking and they decided, yes, it's a good idea to go night drinking in the middle of the city.
Yeah, but that's one of the more. I mean, you can tell they really tried with that shot. I mean, it looks amazing, but once again, it's like kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, like, why are we out there? Why are we spending time with this character who is not going to show up in the next scene?
Exactly. But then to get back on kind of the story or the heart of the movie, well, let's get past the first half that was a little weaker, and there was a whole bunch of just kind of getting past a bunch of stuff to kind of the more poignant, important, interesting, and honest parts of the story. It's a very diverse cast, and they seem to try to tackle a lot in terms of just, I guess, acceptance is a good way of putting it. There is a kind of what do you call it? There's a love story between Mo and the van driver, because none of them can drive. Sam, played by Gabori Sidibe, Gabori Sidibe.
Of Precious fame.
Okay, so that is Precious. I was wondering. There's a connection there. She's kind of a bigger girl. Later we find out she has diabetes. So she has kind of her own struggles to deal with. But
though that plot element also doesn't go anywhere.
There you go. There's that half and half we were talking about. But it's nice that I think Mo is so kind of timid about the whole brothel thing that he very much outwardly prefers a more natural, intimate connection, whereas Scotty is just doing it kind of for the American Pie reason of, I gotta get laid because I'm crossing this age threshold and it's what's societally expected of me. Where then the Matt character, he kind of has no problems getting with girls, but he does have that one scene with his girlfriend that only lasts one scene where you find out he has a girlfriend, and by the end of it, he no longer has a girlfriend. He doesn't necessarily have a problem attracting women, but he does have a problem closing the deal, let's say, just because, he has some medical issues, and he's the old soldier isn't as reliable as he would like him to be, and those are all things that they have to deal with and talk about and be honest with their partners about. And so that's a lot of the reason why I like the movie, because it seems there's just a lot of heart. You sympathize with these characters, you empathize with them, and you just you want the best for them because they haven't done anything wrong. They don't necessarily deserve this. Not to say that it's a punishment and it's a terrible way to live, but they long for more and you want them to be happy.
Well, I would also agree that like by the end of the movie, like even though it started off poorly, by the end of the movie I did care about all of the characters involved. I actually cared about who they were, not necessarily like even if their initial plan to go up to a brothel and get laid went on its own unique set of events, and it had its own ending that may not be quite at the same place that they were expecting to be.
Hmm.
Um, I do feel that by the end of the movie, I actually did care about their plight, who they were. Um, and I feel that's what makes the film effect. It may not make the film as perfect as it could be, but it definitely makes the film effective.
Yeah, by the end of it, I think everyone's humanized and everyone's motivations are very real. And the motivations aren't necessarily to just have sex, lose your virginity, get laid, whatever it is. The motivation is, can these people ever find a real connection, a real relationship? And they all struggle with that. And I think, in a way, Scotty and Matt kind of find it together. They find it with each other, with their parents. Something that we haven't quite touched on is communicating how they went on this trip. These guys don't necessarily get permission to hire a driver and go to, where was it, Vancouver, and go to a brothel. Matt has these very,
Though you could say that also kind of that is what sets up the hijinks. A lot of the early the first half of the hijinks in the movie result from them trying to keep this from their parents.
Yeah, and there's almost a non-payoff when, well, maybe I shouldn't go that far into it, but
but you can basically say it doesn't really pay off that much. It's only because by the time it does kind of sort of pay off, is we get to that emotional heart of the movie where the initial problem doesn't seem to be as meaningful as it was.
Exactly. So at that point, yeah, exactly. And so the way these guys do it is they've all saved their money here and there. And Scotty convinces Matt that this is a good idea. They both convince Mo that this is a good idea. They hire a driver. At first, they don't tell her what they're doing because there is shame. There's shame involved in, hey, we're trying to, have sex. It's a thing that's very hard for us to go about normally. But this facility has, considers us. Eventually the driver finds out and she's all right with it. She's like, okay, I don't think that's weird at all. I think that's, natural and something that, you're kind of entitled to.
Although you can also say that's a subject that's a little bit, that's just kind of like a small part of a bigger idea. The idea that like there are certain people that you can't really discuss the entire idea of having a sexual relationship with. Like nobody, like you're almost, society almost shames you into hiding what you want.
Yeah. So one of the big things that the movie kind of tries to tell you is comes in the package of the parents. So the parents are always there for them in terms of support, what they need physically, kind of emotionally, but there is a distance between the characters and their parents, because I think at some point the parents become numb to the struggles of their kid, kind of the way society becomes numb to the struggles of the handicapped society.
All they see is the required needs that caregiving takes care of.
Right.
The minimum like required needs for them to receive their care, and less so about like what else do these characters necessarily want.
Exactly. And sometimes what ends up happening is that they can be a great example is that first opening scene where Janine Garofalo is so attentive to her son's needs that she's literally washing his balls, but at the same time so aloof about what he actually wants and is craving and would like fulfill him in terms of like a partner. Like she's touching him in his private area out of necessity, but he really wants someone to touch him there out of love and intimacy, you know.
Though, I suppose if I had any final thoughts in regards to the film, I would probably say that this is less about, like, it starts off with his idea that he feels as though the thing that is missing from his life is sexual contact.
Mm.
But by the time we get to the end of the story, what he feels he is missing in his life is personal contact. That the personal contact that he has with his friends is more meaningful than the sexual contact that he had with the people, with the lady in the brothel.
Yeah.
What would you say your final thoughts are on the movie?
Well, all in all, I thought this was a heartwarming movie. It was good. It was funny. Yes, it could have been better at times. Sometimes the script seemed a little weak. But ultimately, it could have been better at times. And sometimes the script seemed weak, but it got me thinking about people with disabilities, what they go through, their struggle not only externally because of the way society is built and doesn't cater to them, but then internally what they could be missing in terms of just happiness and fulfillment. And it doesn't beat you over the head with it like a sad, deep, dark drama. It tries to be lighthearted. It tries to stay fun. And I think it does a good job accomplishing that. Yeah, it kind of gets into the weeds with a couple extra hijinks that don't really lead anywhere. But all in all, it got me sympathizing with this community and I think made me less afraid to talk about the subject and also kind of excited and willing to learn more and try to help. What about you, Nick? What do you think of the movie?
I enjoyed it. I think I would probably recommend this movie. I feel like we're on the same page for a lot of this. The hijinks are kind of just there. They're more or less meaningless hijinks that they go on to kind of fill in that time. But at its core, it is much more of an emotional drama than you would have expected, but it also kind of maintains its lightheartedness. Like its finale, which I do not want to spoil in any way, shape, or form, is that kind of mixture where it takes its a heavier ending, which could have very easily been very dramatic, but it also plays on it in a more lighthearted way. It remembers its themes, it remembers what it's trying to do, while also being fun at the same time, which is a very, very difficult line to struggle for any filmmaker. And the fact that they were able to cap it off as well as they did means something.
Yeah, and I can see why a movie like this would be on the blacklist, where it's an interesting subject matter. It speaks to an underrepresented community, and might not be a studio executive's idea of a big blockbuster film, and why the Chicago Media Angels would want to support it, and give it wings, as it were.
Let's see.
So go see.
Uh,
So go see Come As You Are. I saw it on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime. I think it was $4.99. You could to rent it, and I think it's worth taking a look at.
It is this a specific season that has enveloped us. A specific season of holidays, which I feel makes it very notable that we could perhaps also recommend some more seasonal flicks to gaze upon during this holiday season, while you're in your home, unable to go out to movie theaters because they are all closed. Alister, do you have any recommendations for a holiday film?
Holiday films. Well, I always love recommending that Futurama episode where Santa tries to kill the crew because they ended up celebrating Xmas. But beyond that, I do have a childhood favorite. I don't typically like these Christmas movies, stop motion, classic 1960s or whatever movies that look all creepy and weird. I'm not a huge fan of the repetitive music that you hear every single year for your whole life. But there is one movie, Olive.
What
the
is
Other
that
Reindeer.
movie?
Should I say that again?
I can't say I've actually heard of Olive the Other Reindeer. What is that?
Well, it stars Drew Barrymore as a little cartoon animated dog named Olive, and she hears a little news bulletin on the radio where dear old St. Nicholas says that he's going to have a tough Christmas this year, and he's going to need all of the other reindeer to come help pull his sleigh. Something to that effect. And Olive hears this, and she, I guess, mishears, and she's like, oh, did he say that Santa needs Olive, the other reindeer? And being such a huge fan of Christmas, she strongly believes that she is a reindeer. She really wants to be a reindeer, that one day she'll help Santa pull his sleigh. She takes this opportunity to get to the North Pole, and there is just adorable hijinks ensues. There's a penguin postal service man. Just imagine a little penguin in a mailman outfit. And my goodness, it's just, I highly recommend Olive the Other Reindeer. Beautifully animated film. Drew Barrymore. So fun, so cute. What about you, Nick? What crappy Christmas recommendation do you have for us?
I offer you no Christmas recommendations this year.
Boo.
Instead, I present to you with a New Year's movie to watch.
Ooh.
Which, it's something you don't necessarily think about too often. Like, what would be a New Year's movie? And thusly, I had rediscovered that Four Rooms was a New Year's movie. I had forgotten that story actually does take place on New Year's night.
Oh.
About a bellhop played by Tim Roth as he makes his way between four individual separate stories taking place on that one distinct New Year's night. Each story presented by a different writer, different director. The first story, it's all right. It's not. It's nothing special.
Mm-hmm.
The second story is pretty good. In which, like, the bellhop has found himself stuck between these two lovers who are having a very, very strange evening. But it's the third and the fourth stories in Four Rooms that take the cake, with the third one written and directed by Robert Rodriguez, and the fourth one written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. Both of them are at the top of their game with that second half of Four Rooms. And so if you're going to watch anything this New Year's, don't watch a movie that has a very specific thing happen at midnight. Watch Four Rooms.
Nice. And Four Rooms a classic, especially for film buffs. If you're looking for that Tarantino gold, that Robert Rodriguez gold. Now, you say he's at the top of his game. I'm not sure. I'm not the biggest fan of Robert Rodriguez. I think he did amazing things with what was it? The Mexican and Once Upon a Time in Mexico. But
I would say like Desperado though was better than Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Yes, I did like Desperado a lot. But Spy Kids 4D, come on. But yeah, Four Rooms, highly recommended. One of Tarantino's kind of like very first movies. I think the reason that there are four stories is because these directors didn't have enough money to make one movie themselves. So, it's kind of a student film kind of thing to all get together and do this kind of like a little segmented movie with a through line. But yeah, I didn't realize that was a New Year's movie. That's I'm going to have to rewatch that on New Year's.
Or earlier. Anytime is a good time to watch it. Even right now. Stop listening to us.
Don't stop listening.
Right now.
Don't do that. Or I guess you could, because Nick, I think with that, we've come to the end of another conversation about movies.
And I hope you come back next time for another conversation on movies.